The Tuareg are Berber people with a traditionally nomadic pastoralist lifestyle. They are the principal inhabitants of the Saharan interior of North Africa. The Tuareg language, a branch of the Berber languages, has an estimated 1.2 million speakers. About half this number is accounted for by speakers of the Eastern dialect. Most Tuareg live in the Saharan parts of Niger, Mali, and Algeria. Being nomadic, they move constantly across national borders, and small groups of Tuareg also live in southeastern Algeria, southwestern Libya and northern Burkina Faso, and a small community in northern Nigeria. Names. The origin and meaning of the name Tuareg has long been debated, with various etymologies advanced, although it would appear that Tuareg is derived from the broken plural of Taji, a name whose former meaning was inhabitant of Targa Channel. See Al-Oyali al. 2003. 656 SV. Targa. Tuareg were called Teberikala in the Ottoman Empire. The name of the Tuareg for themselves is Imuha or Imusha. The term for a Tuareg man is Amajar, the term for a woman Tamajak. The spelling variants given reflect the variety of the Tuareg dialects, but they all reflect the same linguistic root, expressing the notion of freeman, strictly only referring to the Tuareg nobility, to the exclusion of the artisan client castes and slaves. Another self-designation of more recent origin is linguistic, Kel-Tamashek or Kel-Tamajak, speakers of Tamashek, also encountered in ethnographic literature of the early 20th century as the name Kel-Taj-el-Must, people of the Vale, and the Blue People. Douglas Porch, in his book, The Conquest of Morocco, posits that the French describe the term Tuareg as the Arabic name given to the Berber tribes of the sub-Saharan region, which, in translation, means abandoned by God territory. The Tuareg people inhabit a large area, almost all of the Middle and Western Sahara, as well as the north-central Sahel. In Tuareg terms, the Sahara is not one desert but many, so they call it Tineriwan. Among the many deserts in Africa, there is the true desert Te-acute and E-acute Re-acute. Other deserts are more and less arid, flat and mountainous. Adre, Tagant, Tamatani's Ruft, Adgar Fufas, Tamasna, Azawa, Adar, Damagu, Tagama, Manga, Air, Taramit, Kawa, Jado, Tadmate, Admar, Iaga, Ahaga, Tasilinaj, Tadrit, Idan, Tanghat, Fezan, Tabesti, Kalansho, Libyan Desert, etc. While there is little conflict about the driest parts of Tuareg territory, many of the water sources and pastures they need for cattle breeding get fenced off by absentee landlords, impoverishing some Tuareg communities. There is also an unresolved land conflict about many stretches of farmland just south of the Sahara. Tuareg often also claim ownership over these lands and over the crop and property of the impoverished Ramite people farming them. History. Early history. The Tuareg expanded southward from the Tafilalt region into the Sahel under their legendary queen Tinhanan, who is assumed to have lived in the 4th or 5th century. Tinhanan is credited in Tuareg lore with uniting the ancestral tribes and founding the unique culture that continues to the present day. At Tabalessa, a grave traditionally held to be hers has been scientifically studied. Colonial era. At the turn of the 19th century, the Tuareg territory was organized into confederations, each ruled by a supreme chief, along with a council of elders from each tribe. These confederations are sometimes called drum groups, after the Aminokal symbol of authority, a drum. Clan elders, called Imegaran, are chosen to assist the chief of the confederation. Historically, there are 7 recent major confederations. Kelagia or Azyar. Center is the oasis of Agat. Kelahaga, in Ahaga Mountains. Kelada, or Kelasiuk. Kedal, and Timbuktu. Iwalimadan Kalataram, or Western Iwalimadan. Menaka, and Azawa region. Iwalimadan Keldenig, or Eastern Iwalimadan. Chintabaradan, Abila, Teliarazawa, Keler, Isode, Agades, Iangal, Timia and Ifruan, Kelgres, Zinda and Tanut and south into northern Nigeria, Kelloe, Air Massif, seasonally south to Tessua. In the late 19th century, the Tuareg resisted the French colonial invasion of their central Saharan homelands. Tuareg broadswords were no match for the more advanced weapons of French troops. After numerous massacres on both sides, the Tuareg were subdued and required to sign treaties in Mali 1905 and Niger 1917. In southern Morocco and Algeria, the French met some of the strongest resistance from the Ahaga Tuareg. Their Aminokal, traditional chief Moussa Agamastan, fought numerous battles in defense of the region. Finally, Tuareg territories were taken under French governance, and the confederations were largely dismantled and reorganized. Post-colonial era, when African countries achieved widespread independence in the 1960s, the traditional Tuareg territory was divided among a number of modern nations: Niger, Mali, Algeria, Libya, and Burkina Faso. Competition for resources in the Sahel has since led to conflicts between the Tuareg and neighboring African groups, especially after political disruption following French colonization and independence. There have been tight restrictions placed on nomadization because of high population growth. Desertification is exacerbated by human activity, i.e., exploitation of resources and the increased firewood needs of growing cities. Some Tuareg are therefore experimenting with farming. Some have been forced to abandon herding and seek jobs in towns and cities. In Mali, a Tuareg uprising resurfaced in the Adrer Nefufas Mountains in the 1960s, following Mali's independence. Several Tuareg joined, including some from the Adrer des Ifras in northeastern Mali. The 1960s rebellion was a fight between a group of Tuareg and the newly independent state of Mali. The Malian army suppressed the revolt. Resentment among the Tuareg fueled the second uprising. This second uprising was in May 1990. At this time, in the aftermath of a clash between government soldiers and Tuareg outside a prison in Chintabaradan, Niger, Tuareg in both Mali and Niger claimed autonomy for their traditional homeland. Deadly clashes between Tuareg fighters and the military of both countries followed, with deaths numbering well into the thousands. Negotiations initiated by France and Algeria led to peace agreements. Both agreements called for decentralization of national power and guaranteed the integration of Tuareg resistance fighters into the country's respective national armies. Major fighting between the Tuareg resistance and government security forces ended after the 1995 and 1996 agreements. As of 2004, sporadic fighting continued in Niger between government forces and Tuareg groups struggling for independence. In 2007, a new surge in violence occurred. Since the development of Berberism in North Africa in the 1990s, there has also been a Tuareg ethnic revival. Since 1998, 3 different flags have been designed to represent the Tuareg. In Niger, the Tuareg people remain diplomatically and economically marginalized, remaining poor and not being represented in Niger's central government. Traditional social stratification. Traditionally, Tuareg society is hierarchical, with nobility and vassals. Each Tuareg clan is made up of several family groups, each led by its chief, the Amga. A series of Torshitan may bond together under an Aminokal, forming a Kel clan confederation. Tuareg self-identification is related only to their specific Kel, which means those of, e.g., Kel Dinig, Kel Ataram. The position of Amga is hereditary through a matrilineal principle. It is usual for the son of a sister of the incumbent chieftain to succeed to his position. The Aminokal is elected in a ritual which differs between groups. The individual Amga who lead the clans making up the confederation usually have the deciding voice. Nobility and vassals. The work of pastoralism was specialized according to social class. Tells are ruled by the IMUSA nobility, warrior aristocrats who organized group defense, livestock raids, and the long-distance caravan trade. Below them were a number of specialized metier castes, formerly enslaved vassals of specific Imajahan. They are said by tradition to be descended from nobility in the distant past, and thus maintain a degree of social distance from lower orders. Traditionally, some merchant castes had a higher status than all but the nobility among their more settled compatriots to the south. With time, the difference between the two castes has eroded in some places, following the economic fortunes of the two groups. Imajahan have traditionally disdained certain types of labor and prided themselves in their warrior skills. The existence of lower servile and semi-servile classes has allowed for the development of highly ritualized poetic, sport, and courtship traditions among the Imajahan. Following colonial subjection, independence, and the famines of the 1970s and 1980s, noble classes have more and more been forced to abandon their caste differences. They have taken on labor and lifestyles they might traditionally have rejected. Client castes after the adoption of Islam, a separate class of religious clerics, the Inalman or marabouts, also became integral to Tuareg social structure. Following the decimation of many clans, noble Imajahan caste in the colonial wars of the 19th and 20th centuries, the Inalman gained leadership in some clans, despite their often servile origins. Traditionally, Inalman clans were not armed. They provided spiritual guidance for the nobility, and received protection and arms in return. Inhadayen were a blacksmith client caste who fabricated and repaired the saddles, tools, household equipment and other material needs of the community. They were often, in addition to craftwork, the repository of oral traditions and poetry. They were also often musicians and played an important role in many ceremonies. Their origins are unclear, one theory proposing an original Jewish derivation. They had their own special dialect or secret language. Because of their association with fire, iron and precious metals and their reputation for cunning tradesmanship, the ordinary Tuareg regarded them with a mixture of awe and distrust. Tuareg peasants, the people who farm oases in Tuareg-dominated areas, form a distinct group known as Izegahan. Their origins are unclear, but they often speak both Tuareg dialects and Arabic, though a few communities are Songhair speakers. Traditionally, they worked land owned by a Tuareg noble or vassal family, being allowed to keep a fifth part of their produce. Their Tuareg patrons were usually responsible for supplying agricultural tools, seed and clothing. Bonded castes and slaves. Like other major ethnic groups in West Africa, the Tuareg once held slaves. However, the Tuareg even in present day still maintain the practice of slavery. The slaves called Eklin once formed a distinct social class in Tuareg society. When French colonial governments were established, they passed legislation to abolish slavery, but did not enforce it. Some commentators believe the French interest was directed more at dismantling the traditional Tuareg political economy, which depended on slave labor for herding, than at freeing the slaves. Historian Martin Klein reports that there was a large-scale attempt by French West African authorities to liberate slaves and other bonded castes in Tuareg areas following the 1914–1916 Firawan revolt. Despite this, French officials following the Second World War reported there were some 50,000 Bella under direct control of Tuareg masters in the Gao Timbuktu areas of French Sudan alone. This was at least 4 decades after French declarations of mass freedom had happened in other areas of the colony. In 1946, a series of mass desertions of Tuareg slaves and bonded communities began in Nioro and later in Menakar, quickly spreading along the Niger River Valley. In the first decade of the 20th century, French administrators in southern Tuareg areas of French Sudan estimated 3-2 servile Tuareg populations at ratios of 1 to 8 or 9. At the same time, the servile Rimib population of the Messina Fulb, roughly equivalent to the Bella, made up between 70% to 80% of the Fulb population, while servile Songhair groups around Gao made up some 2/3 to 3/4 of the total Songhair population. Klein concludes that roughly 50% of the population of French Sudan at the beginning of the 20th century were in some servile or slave relationship. While post-independence states have sought to outlaw slavery, results have been mixed. Traditional caste relationships have continued in many places, including the institution of slavery. According to the Travel Channel show Bob Geldof in Africa, the descendants of those slaves known as the Bella are still slaves in all but name. In Niger, where the practice of slavery was outlawed in 2003, a study found that almost 8% of the population are still enslaved. In the country of Mali, many slaves held by the Tuareg were liberated during 2013-14 when French troops intervened on behalf of the Malian government against Islamic radicals with whom the Tuareg were allied during their attempt at secession.